Welcome, 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 and happy Pride. I'm Olivia Katrangian, the founder of the International Armenian Literary Alliance, and I'm so excited to welcome you to Queer Speculations, a virtual reading and gathering. We are hosting this event during Pride Month and have updated our logo, so we're ready for the Pride Party, but at IALA, we read queer literature all year long. In case you missed it, a recording of our last Literary Lights event featuring Armen Davudyan's poetry collection, The Palace of 40 Pillars, is available on our YouTube channel, as is a reading and discussion on Nancy Agabian's novel, The Fear of Large and Small Nations, in addition to much more fantastic programming. If you'd like to support our programming, please visit armenianliterary.org. IALA is an almost completely volunteer-run organization, so your donation will go directly to supporting Armenian writers. This event will be recorded and shared on YouTube, so if you prefer to turn off your camera, please do so. Afterwards, we'll be hosting a social hour, which will not be recorded, and I hope you stay for that. Thank you so much to our co-sponsors, Pink Armenia, GALAS, NAASR, Entanik, and Poets and Writers. This event is funded in part by Poets and Writers with public funds from the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature. Before we begin, I'd like to invite our co-sponsors to say a few words. First, we'll have GALAS, the Gay and Lesbian Armenian Society.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us today. Just wanted to offer a quick correction. We actually updated our name to be a little bit more inclusive. Used to be Gay and Lesbian Armenian Society. We've kept the name GALAS. We are now officially the LGBTQ+ Armenian Society. We are a resource group for queer Armenians worldwide, and we're based in Los Angeles. We're an all-volunteer organization, and we've just celebrated our 25th anniversary. You can stay in touch by finding us on Instagram and subscribing to our newsletter. We're excited to be a part of this event and happy to be here with you all. Happy Pride.
Thank you, and sorry about the name mix-up. Next is Hrepsime Kizogyan, the Executive Director of Pink Armenia, who I just had the pleasure of meeting in Yerevan. Hrepsime?
Thank you so much, and hi everyone. As you said, I'm representing Pink Armenia, which is an LGBTQ+ organization operating in Armenia, and we do provide different services and activities to support our queer community who is living in Armenia. We have safe spaces all around Armenia, not only in Yerevan, but in other regions of Armenia as well. And we try to cover all the needs that queer people might have, having the life of living in a country like Armenia, which is not very supportive of queer people, but we try to do our best and support. And it's really, I'm so happy to join you during this event to share these moments during Pride, which is very important for queer people, especially for queer artists and writers that are so talented, and they do really need some spaces when we can be included and inclusive. So thank you so much for the invitation, and thank everyone for joining and sharing this moments with us. And I hope everyone would have a great time. Thank you.
Thank you, Hrepsime. Next, we have Anahit, the founder of Entanik.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Olivia. Entanik is a queer Armenian and other Swana folks and allied platform, and we offer events, and our main purpose is to offer connections. People reach out to us for all sorts of things, and we always hope to share our network worldwide. So thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, Anahit. Next up, it is my pleasure to introduce our host for tonight, or today, JP de Boghossian. He is the founder of the Queer Armenian Library, the world's first library devoted to literature, film, and television by, about, and for queer Armenians. If you haven't checked it out, you are in for a treat. He hosts This Queer Book Saved My Life, a 2024 GLAAD Media Award nominee for Outstanding Podcast. He is a Lambda Literary Fellow, and his essays have been anthologized in We Are All Armenian, The Sun Isn't Out Long Enough, and Emerge. He also hosts The Gailey Show and has just returned from Oxford University, where one of the world's oldest libraries, thanks to JP's advocacy work, is displaying queer Armenian books. From there, they will tour libraries across the UK. So without further ado, JP, thank you for this very special event.
Thank you, Olivia. Yes, so hi, my name is JP Boghossian. I use he, they pronouns, and it really was a very special week for queer Armenian literature and media to be at the Bodleian Library and to see a conference of people who were not Armenian having such a very intense interest in our literature and our media was very exciting. And it will be on display at the Bodleian for a number of months here. So if you follow us on Instagram at readtheqal, that is our social media channel for the Queer Armenian Library, we will include the dates for how long it is at the Bodleian and when it goes on tour at other libraries throughout the country, the kingdom. And also it will maintain as a permanent collection within the Bodleian as well, and it will be specifically marked as the Queer Armenian Collection within the library. So folks who want to view the work and check it out will always have that access moving forward at Oxford. And I do want to thank Olivia for originally making the connection between the staff and faculty at Oxford and myself and the library. And so hopefully this will be the beginning of a larger partnership with the university. We'll see. Stay tuned for more details. We also had a huge collection added to the library in the past week, and I actually have a few more titles that will be coming by the end of the month as well. So there is a lot of new content, which is also very exciting. And because we are going to feature 3 of those today over the next hour and a half. First, we're going to have a conversation with Anahit and Jake Budenz. We're going to be in conversation together about queer speculation and using speculative fiction to imagine and reimagine new queer Armenian futures. And then Brent Love is here, who will be reading from his new memoir, Leap, which came out this month. Very exciting. So we'll have a few questions for Brent as well after reading from his memoir. So I would like to start, speaking of readings, with Anahit and Jake from your work. So Anahit, would you like to go first and give us a reading from your new book?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, this is an excerpt from my story, Azad Prime, which is full of ancient magic that crosses the boundaries of time and space to what might be a not so distant future. As she stepped from the hatch onto the soft grass, swaying in a gentle breeze, Arevik looked around in wonder. She could see one of the 2 moons just beginning to dip below the horizon. Looking up, she could see a red planet on one side and a colorful nebula on the other, both growing dimmer as the twin suns began to rise. She descended from the ridge where she landed into a sea of wildflowers flowing down towards a distant stone structure. What was this place she'd been led to? Listen, my children, to the story of our coming to Azad Prime, the place of freedom. Linume chi linum, there was and there was not. It is said that in ancient times, when we were one with our mountains, Anahit, one of the most powerful of the gods, gave her people a sacred stone, an amulet, in order to save her people in a time of great trouble. The stone was lost for a time while the people suffered violence from those who were greedy to steal their lives, wealth, and lands. In those evil times, the people turned away from each other and their love for the land and their creator, instead embracing the ways of their conquerors. It seemed that the gods had abandoned them as they had abandoned their own gods. But Anahit had not abandoned her people. She waited for them to return to the ways of peace and harmony that she had taught them. In the evil time of Tsakasmanuchun, or genocide, a young woman named Nairi found the stone among her grandmother's belongings as they prepared to flee from the onslaught of the occupying army. With the protection of Anahit's amulet, Nairi was able to escape her persecutors and to help many others to flee. Nairi grew old in her exile, struggling to keep her language and culture alive in a new land that held no place for her. Nairi passed down the amulet to her daughter, Atrik, who had grown up in the new land. By the time Atrik was an old woman, the amulet was forgotten and its powers had passed into legend. Before she died, Astrid passed the stone to her granddaughter Arevik. Although Arevik was born in the new land, she was curious about the ancient customs of her people. The times were again violent, and she often felt a helpless rage as she watched the destruction of her family's homeland and other places across the region. She held on to the stone, remembering the legends of its power and hoping it could provide her some of the resilience and strength of her ancestors. When Arevik traveled to her ancestral homeland, Anahit's amulet went with her. At one of the ancient matach, or sacrificial sites, Arevik began to feel a strong energy emanating from the stone. As she stood before an enormous stone arch, the amulet began to vibrate in her pocket. She stepped forward under the arch and felt a strange sensation in her body. Suddenly, her vision and hearing seemed to blur. She could see nothing ahead of her but darkness. With a feeling much like she was falling through empty space, Arevik realized that her vision was clearing and she could again hear the sounds around her. But the land she saw ahead of her was unfamiliar, and behind her she again saw darkness and not the matach place she had come from. Arevik could see she was on the edge of a city, at once foreign and familiar. She could see towers and streets. Walking towards them, she came to an area of towers with electric signs in the windows. A commercial district. She watched as a woman alighted from a flying car in front of one of the towers. The woman pointed a small device the size of a cell phone at one of the windows. Arevik could see the window light up as the woman's screen lit up, and there appeared to be information scrolling on it. The woman gave an exasperated sigh and flicked her hand from the screen into the air, where a larger screen appeared floating before her. Arevik watched as she scrolled through the information on the screen, and it looked like English. The woman seemed to find what she was looking for and jabbed a finger at her choice. As Arevik watched, a drone descended with a package. The woman took it, turned to Arevik, and said, "Finally, these things can be such a pain. Are you trying to decide what you want?" It seems like I forgot my," Arevik mumbled. "You forgot your communicator. Stupid things are easy to lose. Do you ever think about getting a chip implant? I mean, you can just pull the info screen up right behind your eyes whenever you want. I keep thinking I'm going to get one, but then I worry I won't like it. But everyone's doing it," the woman said. "I'm Star, by the way. Do you live around here?" "No," said Arevik. "I'm not from around here." "War refugee? You look a little lost," Star said. Yes, I am a bit." Arevik hardly knew what to say. "I can get whatever you needed from the shop tower, and you can transfer the creds to me now," Star offered. Creds, Arevik thought. No cash. So how is she going to get credits? She touched the amulet in her pocket and felt its energy strengthen her resolve and build her courage. She could do this. She could find out where she was and how to survive here. "Life's tough in the Democratic Republic," Star offered. "And since the latest war, refugees have been pouring into the city, and of course, the government isn't doing anything to help with resettlement. So if you need help, just tell me. My family came here as refugees a long time ago, and we haven't forgotten what it's like." Arevik made her way in this new world. She began to see the similarities to her own world. Many of the cities had the same names or variations on the names she knew. Some of the nation states she knew remained, most with new names and with a shiny veneer of prosperity. The tech was more advanced, but the politics remained the same. Like many other young people whose families could not buy their way out, Arevik had been conscripted to fight in one of the endless wars her government had waged. Because she'd survived that, Arevik was determined to learn their tech and find her way home. Star was full of information and didn't ask too many questions. People assumed things from Arevik's refugee status, and they didn't care to ask more. Refugees were often funneled into jobs supporting the military. Arevik was able to find work with her military training, where she learned about the government's space exploration program designed to discover and exploit any resource-rich bodies nearby. Arevik's explorations of the place where she had stepped through the portal hadn't revealed a way back to her world. She tried to use the amulet at different places, but no portal appeared. She remembered what her grandmother had said. "There's another silly superstition about the amulet, that if you put it under your pillow while you sleep, you will dream of the answers you seek." Arevik put the amulet under her pillow that night. For several nights, Arevik dreamed of stars, planets, galaxies, and always felt light and happy floating in space. During the day, she went to her job, cataloging the data collected from the long-range sensors and probes. As a pilot, Arevik was curious about the ships used to take the droids to the moon, nearby planets, and asteroid belts for mining. But people rarely accompanied them. It was too dangerous. She read the flight training and ship's manuals on her brakes and discovered that the operation of the ships was familiar, even though the propulsion systems were far advanced. The technology interested her, so she continued studying the ship's engineering. Aravik's superior, Natalia, liked her. She was hardworking, smart, and amiable. Aravik, have you been studying on your brakes? You don't have to do that. I'm impressed. Yes, ma'am, it's fascinating, and it might help me do my job better. Refugees were lazy and not very bright, not to mention expendable, but this one was different. She would file that possibly useful information away for later. Aravik arrived at work one morning to find Natalia waiting for her. Aravik, you have new work orders. There's an issue with the Mars droid's data, and we're sending you to repair the problem. Me? Aravik was surprised at first. These missions were too dangerous to send employees, and that's why only droids were used. But refugees were expendable. Natalia smiled, calculating. Having your expertise with our data collection system and your skill as a pilot, I thought you'd be the perfect person for the adventure. And when you come back, you'll be a hero. Not many refugees have an opportunity like this. If I come back, you mean, Aravik thought. But in her research, she'd seen that there were habitable planets just beyond asteroid belt and planets that didn't have the resources the government was looking for. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and the rest is in the book. Thanks, JP.
Thank you. And then Jake, would you like to do a reading from your short story collection?
Yes, thank you so much. And amazing, amazing. Can't wait to talk about your work. So this is the last story in my collection, Tea Leaves. It's called The Age of Oceanus. Everyone would remember where they were the day the first river goddess died. The viral video came from Mexico, spreading first across the internet and then across the news as such things go. It was the slightest bit grainy, caught at the early stages of dusk with what must have been a cellular phone. Chalchiutlique, a goddess long since presumed dead, along with most of the Aztec tradition, dragged herself onto the muddy bank of the Rio Grande, jade skirts licked with oil and winged headdress tangled with plastic six-pack rings that captured other plastic jetsam of a species driving itself and its world to extinction. Chalchiutlique managed to stand, stagger a hunched step, and lift her face to the camera with her mouth open in a silent plea before she fell face first in the mud. According to sources, this was not the only sighting of Chalchiutlique in the last decade. Other locals reported having seen the wide-hip diosa in varying states of filth. A drilling technician's wife even reported a midnight sighting of Chalchiutlique in which the goddess opened her mouth, allegedly with a look of desperate warning on her face, when heaps of stinking fish poured dead from her mouth. Experts dismissed the initial claims on the grounds that the Rio Grande was too far north for a cosmic representative of the Aztec Empire, but most understood upon her death that she was simply very far from home. It was not the first sighting, but it was the only one with clear footage, decisively clearer than any clips of UFOs or Yetis or Nessies or Chupacabras or ghosts or any other wonders of cryptozoology, conspiracy, myth, or religion. However, it would be the last sighting of the living goddess Chalchiutlique, for there she lay, face down in a heap of oil and trash and mud, and there she would remain. In the weeks following the death of Chalchiutlique, videos and photographs and reported sightings of other dying river goddesses poured into news stations. Images of increasing quality emerged as something of a sport developed, like tornado chasing or whale watching, wherein professional videographers and hobby photographers camped out along the world's most significant and polluted rivers in the hope of capturing the perfect shot. Ganga, making one last ride past Rishikesh, the lotus in her hand wilted, her crocodile steed coughing up what could only be described as human sewage, Ganga herself, shivering with the cold of death in spite of the mid-October heat, the hag, Peg Powler, rising from the River Tees in Dinsdale Park at sunset, water steaming against her skin that bulged with what looked like the embers of coal beneath it, her green hair slashing out like serpents and wrapping around nearby children in an attempt to drag them with her into death as their parents tugged and tugged, leading viewers to wonder what kind of person would stand by and film this, until her hair finally flopped to the ground like limp spaghetti as the burning coals inside her glowed brighter, the steam around her thickened, and finally she plopped into the water and floated away, burnt like a pork roast left in for too long. Still shots of Oba lying akimbo atop the dam at the Ogbomoso Reservoir, and yes, Aritsaya leaping from the tallest high-rise, splattered on the asphalt, where the Naman used to empty into the Bay of Haifa. News pundits debated the veracity of the videos, politicians largely ignored them, conspiracy theories developed, cults formed, scientists shook their heads, for even if they could come up with some explanation for what seemed like yet another worldwide extinction event, the ever-warming climate had proven time and again that nobody with enough power would listen. Still, one thing was certain. Everybody remembered where they were when they saw Chalchiuhtlicue die, and even those who would deny what they saw felt a clenching somewhere between their heart and their belly, a voice deep down telling them that the time to reverse the tides of the changing world had passed. In its place, a new age, one of learning to survive in a dying world or choosing to die with it, had begun. Thank you.
Thank you both. I love both of your works and congratulations on your recent publications. Just some quick logistics as folks are watching me. I have lots of notes in front of me, so if you see me looking down, that's not me being rude. I just have lots of things that I'm referencing. And if you see me like moving in my chair and constantly shifting, I just have a weird back situation happening today. So that's just me trying to find a comfortable position. And I am very much looking forward to my first question, because both of you are bringing such very interesting work forward for us to think about. So I do have a two-part opener question. The first part is, how do both of you think about this idea of the future, right? And does it come to you in a linear fashion, right? Where you have past, present, and future? Is it more cyclical for you? And then the second part is regarding the idea of the future in terms of what does it mean thematically for you as writers in your work? So who would like to go first? I don't want to put anybody in the spot. Maybe Anahit, would you like to take the first answer at that question?
Sure. So I know you and I have had a conversation like this before, but for me, time isn't linear. It's really, I would describe it as a slipstream where past, present, and future flow together, and we can navigate it, and we can experience different times, and we can learn from them. And then, you know, we can write our own stories instead of just accepting the stories we've been told. And we've been told a lot of stories about ourselves as Armenians, as queers. Yeah. So I think that's really important. And then I guess it's the second part of your question in terms of my work. Like the future for me is happening now. And we are having this conversation, that spans like the millennia. Our history is so old and rich, and I think that's changing our perspectives, and we're rewriting our stories because they've often been told about the people who basically want to annihilate us and then deny our existence. So for me, this ability to access time in this slipstream really invites these, I think, themes of healing, hope, community, acceptance, and hopefully solidarity into my work. That's kind of the way I look at it.
Absolutely. Jake, how about for you?
Yeah, so in my personal life, if such a thing exists for artists, I'm also a witch and a tarot reader. I used to take clients when I lived in New Orleans. I take some clients now, but mostly I read for myself and other people. And so I'm sort of at least twice a week often more engaging with the future and thinking about the future and you know, trying to prepare for the future in that particular way. But I like what Anahit had to say about time being a slipstream, because I have learned that keeping a journal of tarot reading over the years really helps me kind of reframe my past and what I was thinking about in previous times. And it's like in a language that only I can understand. So it's a really, I think, for me, reflecting on the future in this way and trying to frame my present in this way has been just a really valuable personal tool. And I mean, not to be dramatic, but kind of saved my life in some ways, and helped me through scenarios where like I couldn't really talk to anybody about what was happening to me, and I couldn't even really talk about it directly until later I looked back at my notes and was like, wow, I was really trying to tell myself something, or something outside of me was really trying to tell me something. And so, yeah, so in my writing life, I would say I consider writing, especially poetry, to be quite divinatory for me in really unexpected ways, like images or themes, especially from my poems in the past, will come to pass in my life in a really bizarre way. And I know how that sounds, but that's just my truth. And so I do think, like, with writing, this idea of futurity comes into me a lot, in kind of a similar way that you mentioned, where because over the years, especially a lot of my poetic work has been very, very dark for a long time, I've just kind of thought of, okay, if I'm writing the future into my work somehow, or receiving messages, like what would it look like to infuse that work with more optimism? And so I think I like to think Tea Leaves, even though there's a lot of really bleak stuff in there, is generally about optimism, and like optimism through bleakness. And in a way, thinking of the future that way is also my spell, right? It's like my manifestation of like, you know, I'm not the kind of toxic positivity witch or whatever that's like, everything's fine. It's like, no, everything is fucked, but like maybe we can be fine, and maybe we can create beauty in ways that we can control. So yeah, I think the future, even though I don't write a ton of future sci-fi type of stuff, I think the future is like really, really important to my work.
There's like magical lighting happening around you. I don't know if other people can see that, but like the lighting keeps shifting and changing at like the exact moments that you're saying stuff. So I don't know if you planned that, but I've just been noticing that over the reading and your answer there. I have a question that I want to ask again to both of you. And Anahit, you wrote an essay about queer futurism for your book. And but for both of you, why should those who don't identify as queer embrace queer futurism? Anahit, do you want to go first?
Sorry, either one of us. I just wasn't. We're like both silence politely, not starting for the other person. Okay, well, I'm happy to address this, because I think I had someone recently say to me, "Well, your book is so niche because it's about, you know, queers in the future," and I was like, you know, queer futurism is most of all open and inclusive. And it doesn't look only at identity or sexual preference, but at all the nuanced diversity of life. And it seeks for ways to remedy the problems of current systems of oppression for everyone's benefit. I mean, not just for people who are queer, or in my case, Armenian, or other Swana groups, and it seeks balance, and you know, to your reading, like balance and stewardship of the natural world, so that our species can actually continue to exist on a healthy planet. I mean, it seeks to create worlds where everyone can thrive. So I'm not sure why it wouldn't be of interest. It's just, yeah.
Jake, how about for you?
Yeah, I mean, I not to get my bell hooks on, but queerness to me is about liberation and opposition to oppressive systems, first and foremost, right? And I think, man, if I hear one more literary person say queer speculative fiction is too niche, I mean, I will burn down the world, because it really is about pushing against a system that actually hurts everybody, a hegemonic system that encourages exploitation. And I think in an age where obviously there's a lot of queer book banning going on in the US, it's like, yeah, to people who live within a really oppressive paradigm and either believe in it or don't want to look directly at it, I think queerness is very threatening. And I think, I think a lot about what's happening legislatively in various states right now is way less about, like, it has nothing to do with worrying about children or worrying about influencing children to become queer, and more about like normalizing a kind of resistance to patriarchy. I know I sound a little gender theory-ish, but I really do feel that way for anybody that has any concern with the social state of things, the imperialist state of things. I think queerness is not the only solution, but it's an alternative to like believing in that paradigm. And once you liberate yourself in queerness and liberate yourself from gender, you start to think about other systems that are oppressive and that are not serving. And so I think engaging with it for anyone, even that's not queer, is just a valuable tool for resistance. What would it look like to think outside of that paradigm?
That raises something for me. So I feel like in Armenian literature, generally speaking, tends to be because our history is so vast, that we do tend to be kind of wrestling with I don't want to mean like stigmatizing, like we're always looking backwards, we're always looking at the past, but we do have a long history that we're still trying to process. And what do we do with that? But then for us, queers within the community, like that can lead to some further marginalization in there. And so what I really wanted I was excited about this conversation with both of you is, what are ways that we can use speculative fiction to address, but what you're getting at about the benefits of challenging paradigms, of opening up some new potential futures for ourselves as a community, because I do feel, look, and this is my Queer Armenian Library right here, that we do tend to be innovative. We do tend to be challenging those norms. We do, I think as a genre, are looking more towards the future and the possibilities, more so than maybe the field, the genre writ large. So I don't know if that question is coming through coherently, and I apologize for that because I've been traveling for the past like 48 hours. But how can we use speculative fiction to open up these new avenues of possibility for queer existence within the Armenian community? And I keep bouncing back and forth between you two, but maybe Jake, do you want to start first with that? And then we can have Anahit go.
Sure. I mean, I think that for starters, especially in the sort of academic world, there is a misconception that speculative fiction is by nature sort of escapist. And I think a lot of queer, especially queer speculative writers, or honestly, not to generalize, but I think a lot of marginalized people who write speculative fiction are actually, it's not about escaping reality. It's about finding an alternate pathway to sort of hold a mirror up to it and say, like, is this really how we want to be? Is this really what we want to do? And I think, not that this is the sole virtue of speculative elements, but inviting people in to look at the way things are versus how they could be, but also look at how screwed up things are, and to be invited in by these elements of, this sort of rich tapestry of metaphor that speculative fiction can offer. It just offers a new way to experience reality. And this is maybe less about, this is analogous, I think, to the question of this in Armenian literature. For instance, I would cite Isabel Allende's The House of the Spirits as a really good example of an author who uses magic realism to really draw people into a political reality that was completely ignored globally until really that book came out. And it's the last 100 pages of that book where she just sort of exposes the brutality of the fascist regime that the US like propped up to get a democratically elected socialist president out of office, because that was like too dangerous, for the Nixon administration to let exist. I'm rambling a little bit here, but I'm really interested in speculative work that is inherently political and that inherently sort of seduces people into these glittering worlds, and they don't even realize until halfway through or toward the end that they've been drawn into actually like really harsh realities. N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth trilogy is a similarly analogous. It's like the power of really good speculative fiction is that we can really push against systems, and we can kind of draw people in who might not necessarily be initially attracted to those kinds of ways of thinking or ways of seeing what's going on around them. And you fool people into thinking that they're escaping, and they're actually like, oh no, this is just a really helpful framework to think about reality differently.
I love that. Anahit?
You've said so many things that I think about speculative fiction and my own kind of voracious, addictive reading of it. I totally agree with you. I just, it's the other thing I think, in addition to, I do think one of the things I love about Becky Chambers' work, she's one of my favorite queer speculative fiction writers. I just want her to write more, please. But her work is not so much plot driven, and it draws you, but it draws you in to this world, and she very directly but gently examines so many of the things that you were talking about, Jake, and like and she does it in a way that she often you see the possibilities without her having to hit you over the head with it, and you see so many of the flaws without. I find that sometimes I just want to rail in my own writing instead of gently leading people. So I love that. And I love the way she proposes a better way. And it's so gentle. It just seems so natural that we would, kind of evolution of our society just flow in this way. But one other thing I want to mention about the uses of speculative fiction is this. When I was growing up, there was nobody like me or my family, and definitely no queers, in any of the sci-fi or fantasy that I loved. And so, as you do when you're a kid, I just inserted myself into those stories. Well, clearly they meant for me, an Armenian girl, to be the hero of this. What is this other BS, right? So that's great. But one of the things I realized as an adult, and especially after I had kids, is representation is really, really important. It's more important than we think it is. And so as I was searching my local, very feminist and queer and wonderful bookstore for stuff for my kids, I started thinking about that. And so now I'm really excited to be able to create representation that was missing through my own work. And I think we can place in my speculative worlds, I can place Armenians and other marginalized groups in these positions of being like agents of change, creators of the future, right? Bearers of light. And I think that's like that representation is just like so important for our own mental health, because I think it represents acceptance and belonging. And that's really, I think that's so important to our future. And it normalizes all the different ways of being in the world. So yeah.
I'm curious then for both of you, because with speculative, real quick, I do want to say, for fun fact, the first one of the first, if not the first, representation of a positive lesbian relationship in science fiction was actually by an Armenian author, Gregory Kasparian. Yes, it's an Anglo-American alliance. I think it's back here. I'll find it before we get off today. But we have that. We were here and advancing queer fiction. But I am quite curious for both of you, because you are involved in world building in a way that is different, I feel like, from other types of fiction, right? And so you can really shape the world however you want it to go and be outside kind of the constraints of quote unquote reality. How then, as you're going along in your writing, how do you keep it from becoming like your, I mean, how do I say this? How do you deal with outcomes then as you're going towards build and conclusions? Because you can make them anything you want. So as you're doing that, like how do you manage that conflict, knowing that you can go any which way? I mean, that seems to be, you know, the freedom, but also I could see that as being like, whoa, that's kind of, that's a responsibility there in your writing.
Mm.
I don't know who wants to take that first.
I have I think a simple answer to this. For me, I think it always comes back to the character, whoever the primary character or characters are in a story, and what decisions they make and what incremental changes they do or do not make to their personal circumstances. So I do like to write work that asks pretty big questions, but I've also learned, especially over the last few years, like, you don't have to be really fixated on the idea that a character by the end of the story does a right or a wrong thing, right? It's just like actions and consequences, and sometimes the consequences don't align with the actions and so forth. And so for me, if I have stories that are asking really big questions societally, I don't necessarily feel like it's my job or even my place as a writer to answer those questions for other people, so much as like present scenarios and let them watch somebody make actions or decisions around those circumstances and then decide for themselves, right? So I don't know, I have some pieces in Tea Leaves, I think one could say, where I like moralize toward the end a little bit, and then other pieces where I purposely, I think, eschew some kind of moral answer to what's going on in the story, or some kind of moral way for a character to act. So as far as like world building and building these big political questions into stories, I think for me, how a story ends and what it says, it always comes back down to the personal and to what a character is doing and how they're handling like what's going on around them. And sometimes the answer is very badly. They're handling it very badly. And that's like something that we should let people grapple with too.
Anahit?
Yeah, yeah. I think about a lot. There's a larger story than the short story of Azad Prime that's in the book, and so for instance, with that, I thought a lot about like, well, what would this character do? You know, obviously based on how I developed them and their background and what the situation is, but also I started thinking about over the period of time that I worked on both the book and the project that was behind it, I had so many conversations about the future and the past and what's happening now with all of these. There were so many people I collaborated with. And so I thought a lot about those things because there's a lot of commonality about what people think would be a good future, and there's a lot of diversity about it. And I wanted to leave some room for us to kind of think about this and to, I think one of the problems I always have when I think about like, well, if I could make the revolution tomorrow, what would I want to happen? Well, the problem is you can't just make it and it's all just gonna, flow perfectly after that, right? There's gonna be lots of trial and error. Like, we have a new government. How do we keep corruption out of it after the beginning? Because I think we have this natural tendency as humans to try to like accumulate all of the resources that we can from, the time when resources were scarce, and they aren't now. And so how do we do that? So I don't know, I kind of hope to leave a little bit of ambiguity, and so that other people can think, and will also think about how much trial and error will be involved in actually achieving the future we seek, but also that it will be it will never be a completed whole. It will always be a process, an ongoing process that we have to work and rework. So
That reminds me of Ursula K. Le Guin's novel, The Dispossessed, An Ambiguous Utopia. Very much dealing with what you were talking about there of, here is this world and this different, government and economic system, but it's got its issues and, you have to figure that out. And then in contrast, anyway, it's a really great novel, one of my favorites of all time. Anahit, I wanted to ask you a question also about identity. So your book starts with ancestors. Why was it important for you to connect to the past? Like in terms of how does it anchor identity and how does that past in the slipstream interact with the future?
I think so for me, I feel like the past is always with us. And I think that good or bad, it grounds us in who we are and who we can become in our identity. And I think that sometimes it shows us how not to be in the world. I mean, I have to say that oftentimes when I look at, my own personal history, family history, I do see, and general history, that ways I don't want to be in the world. But also I think that no matter what, there are things in my past that I can learn and grow from. And I think we all have that. But when we can't access our past, or we don't feel like we're part of it, or we don't know what we lose something. Like I was thinking about when I was a kid, there were all these Greek kids in my class, and they knew everything about their history. And I knew almost nothing. And I don't know, I kind of felt like I was an orphan. Like, who am I? Because I don't feel like I know anything. And then I started realizing like a personal connection to one's past is like, it's really affirming and it gives perspective. And so that's why I thought it was also because really I think about this all the time, because this is true about so many different people from different ethnicities that are portraits in this book. Colonizers have tried and are still trying to erase our past.
Mm-hmm.
And we've just existed throughout time, right? We long before 301 AD, we had this culture with visual arts and music and stories and a religion of our own. And like, why wouldn't we want to acknowledge and embrace all that to build our future on? And what I realized in starting with ancestors is that people would come and talk about how disconnected they felt, especially if they were like queer, mixed people, people who don't speak their heritage language, things like this. And that's why I thought it was so important, because it does really, it does have such a strong effect on today and tomorrow. So.
Jake, I've told you that your collection made me believe in magic again in a conversation that we had on the podcast. And I want to come back to that idea that you were mentioning it earlier about creativity as spell work and how some of your poems just you felt like the intention was put out in the world and it created this, it became true, right? In your life. And I know there are a number of authors here with us here today. Can you talk a little bit more about that approach that you have in terms of creativity as spell work, intonation, setting intention, and making those realities as we're talking about queer people creating our futures through speculative fiction?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, I hope I don't sound like a broken record, but I really do think, for one thing, artists, if they choose to identify as such, are witches, right? Like, we are people who are making kind of something out of nothing. We're putting disparate images and symbols and actions together in hopes of achieving some kind of hidden effect in other people and in the way that they see the world. So to me, like, that is witchcraft, right? It's reading a poem out loud is reciting a spell in a way. And I think queer people too. This is Anoni and the Johnsons has this really great sort of thing that she's used to say a lot, where it's like, if you're born trans, you are basically born a witch, because in our present society, you are born in opposition to every dominant religious paradigm. So if you kind of accept those roles in yourself, then there's a way to say like, oh, well, witches are outcasts, or like witches are these empowered other that are, you know, creating a reality sort of outside of the traditional religious hegemonic paradigm, right? So I think like that's all the woo-woo philosophical stuff that I think about when I make work. On a practical level, I make a lot of work inspired by the esoteric, and I think in some ways it's a way of reclaiming traditions that are part of your cultural heritage. Astrik was my first. I was glad that you mentioned that name in your piece, because that was sort of my first engagement with pre-Christian Armenian religious culture like 10 years ago. And so it's to me like engaging in spell work and engaging in ritual and magic and things like that in my personal life. It's like a way to, it's a way of connecting to realities that are, you know, not our daily reality. It's a way of connecting with nature in a really particular way. And I don't know, the queer question of this, I've been thinking a lot lately about glamour magic, which is in, you know, fairy tales where like you transform yourself in some way and that's a spell. And I think queer people, so that's like the artistic side, the queer side of it, I've been thinking a lot about how like queer people know better than anybody how like what you choose to wear affects the way that people treat you outside of the house. And in some ways, depending on where you live, like the more of your truth and reality you choose to live, perhaps the more peril that you're in, or the more or you can leave the house and choose to sort of shapeshift for feelings of safety. And so that's magic too. I mean, queer people are making magic with reality every day just by like being and pushing against and shape shifting where we have to and transforming. So I don't know, this stuff is like all in the mix for me. I think that in my writing, it's like queer people just experience reality differently from how we are told reality is supposed to be. And I think that's true of a lot of marginalized people. Again, I don't want to generalize other people's experience, but you get an idea that the world is this way, and that if you do this thing and that thing, the world is going to treat you this way. And if you're marginalized in any way, that's just like not true for you. So in a way, like I think we're always butting up against a hidden reality that like underlies this sort of hegemonic reality that we're fed. So I don't know that any of that was coherent, but queerness is magic, art is magic, and I just personally choose to engage with the symbolism of magic because it resonates with me, and because thinking about creativity as like a channeling really resonates with me. So yeah, I can't help but have it in my work. It is inescapable to have magic in my work because I cannot disentangle magic from queerness or magic from art.
Thank you for that. And both of you, we do have a question from the audience. I wonder if the authors could discuss the place of trauma, whether that's personal, queer, generational, or historical, into futuristic thought. And then how do reparations, right of return, then can fit into that futuristic thought or not? I'll leave it to either of you to go decide who wants to go first. Just jump in.
Okay, reparations are a big part of my thinking about this project. And how should I answer this question? I think that yeah, this is a hard one. I think that for me anyway, I have to feel that space within me where I can make that peace, because you know the epigenetics of this, it's in my DNA. There's nothing I can really do about that, and my children as well. And I see how it's affected my mother and the rest of my family members. And it's very hard to see that and to know that there's no way to expunge that from our bodies. We still live in these Armenian descendant of genocide survivors' bodies, and we always will. But I do feel like you can make this place within yourself. See, I think about the practical stuff. There's so many things that the United States government could do that by spending almost no money to make reparations to Indigenous Americans. And by the same token, there's so much that, for instance, the Turkish government, the Azeri government, the Russian government, the Iranian government, there's plenty of things they could do without spending almost any money, but they're not going to do them and they're not doing them. So I guess the way I look at this is that we make this space within ourselves and we begin the healing. And part of this idea about speculating about the future and collectively envisioning better futures and ways we can get there and ways we can evolve that future. Part of that is like part of the reparations, you know, returning to my family's ancestral village. That was really hard, knowing all the things that happened there and knowing that those things are all part of me. And not everybody can do that. But I think that's, for me, that was the crucial moment of thinking about, you know, the PTSD of intergenerational trauma and how we can have reparations, despite the fact that no government's going to do anything.
Yeah, I think that the place of trauma in futurity is really prominent just by the fact that, like, when we experience trauma in the present, it has ripple effects long into the future generationally, right? And you know, in the context of the Armenian genocide, of course, in personal contexts, to get woo-woo about it again, I've been working a lot with what I call the Persephone consciousness, which is just cross-culturally, there are figures like Persephone who are brought into the underworld by a sort of abusive patriarchal figure, and like that is a source of generational trauma for my family, for the women and femmes in my family. It's a source of trauma that has appeared in my life, and it's one of those things where, like, you know, when I think about creating a future and future generations, I'm not necessarily planning on having children, but I do feel like in some ways I think a lot of queer people mystically play a role of healing generational trauma. It's, you know, by virtue of the fact that, like, maybe queer people are a little more likely to experience different kinds of trauma that take them to therapy and take them to that kind of reflection of family tree, and have other people in my bloodline before me experience this. And you know, so like I can heal that trauma in myself. Will it have a direct bearing on my spawn? No, but my brother has children, they'll have children, or maybe. And so I think, like, even just for a person's family to move forward and to think of a future for, you know, their own blood, this healing of trauma has to happen. And healing doesn't mean recovering, right? It doesn't mean like that in your lifetime you'll be like, I am healed, right? It means I'm going through a process of healing, and also hopefully interacting with people around me who see me going through that process, and if they're not going through it, are like, what's that? What is it all about? To analyze these things. Is there a way forward? And so I think thinking of a future at all requires you to examine trauma and examine what needs to be healed, not just in yourself, but in your family line, in your people, right? And like thinking about the spell of your own healing as work that you're doing for future generations as well, whether or not you will be the direct giver of the seed or egg toward those future generations. It's like healing now is spell work for people of the future, and showing young people now what it's like to be healing or healed as an adult that's future work. We're working for a future together, I think.
Thank you for that. As moderator, I always have the very unhappy job of also being the timekeeper, which drives me nuts because time is meaningless. But I do want to be mindful of time, because I did see that some folks had to log off to other meetings that they were going to. And so, Anahit and Jacob, thank you so much for this time and sharing your wisdom and your work with us. Thank you very much. We do have, anyway, I see there we do have a comment, and I like the comment that's in the chat, and I think we'll bring it up to the social hour if you both of you can hang around for that, so we can revisit it, because it is a very interesting comment. But for folks, you can do like noise applause or heart emojis to thank both Anahit and Jake for being with us here today and sharing their work. Reparations of the Heart and Tea Leaves. They're gorgeous books. Anahit, I didn't even know how to class. I mean, it's the mixed media in your work is it's excellent. And so you both should be very, very proud of your work. And we are very proud here at the International Armenian Literary Alliance to be in conversation with both of you. Speaking of pride, up next is we're just keeping on the idea of pioneers as well here today. So as Anahit and Jake are pioneers in their genres of speculative fiction, we have with us Brent Love, whose new memoir, Leap, just released this month. And it is a first of its kind memoir, and you will see why as we're going along here. So Brent, would you like to introduce yourself and then read a portion of your memoir for our audience today?
Sure thing. I'm Brent Love. I am so honored to be here. I want to start off speaking about the immense privilege it is to have been able to live in Armenia and to write work about Armenia, which I'll talk about in a minute soon. But it's just an honor for me to be here. My book, Leap, is about my coming out experience, which uniquely happened 3 days before I left to join the Peace Corps, and then I lived in Armenia after that. And there's ups and downs of that journey. It's quite a large book, so there's a lot of things that happened on that journey, and I'm very excited to read it. I wanted, there's a lot of stories in here I wanted to share. So actually, JP, I wanted to play a little game, if you will play one with me to choose the reading. Will you please, because there's a lot of things that I could read. Will you please choose between 3 things, okay? Please choose between Arnold Schwarzenegger, a photo album, and Cocoon.
I've read the book and I'm trying to think now which ones are you going with that? Why
Just
don't we
go
go
with
Cocoon?
instinct.
Because that feels
Okay,
like
great.
blossoming and coming of age, and I think that's very maybe appropriate for an idea of a discussion on futurism today. So why don't we go with Cocoon?
Of course.
What do I get for
All right,
Cocoon?
great. So what you need to know before I start this reading is that I lived in Armenia starting in 2009. I had, at the point of this story, been in Armenia for 5 months. I was really grappling with my new queer identity as a gay man. And I will say, because it's important to the story, I was a virgin at the time. I had never been kissed. And I had never even been to a gay bar or been in a room full of only gay and queer people. At this point of the story, I'm going to Yerevan for the first time after leaving the place where I had been assigned in the northern part of Armenia. And I had heard about a place called Cocoon. We got directions to Cocoon from Alicia, and together Zoe and I walked down site. No, excuse me, I should say there are names in here like Zoe and Alicia that are other Peace Corps volunteers. Zoe is my best friend at the time. Zoe and I walked down site Nova and then Terrion Street past the small man-made pond with a statue of a musician with exaggerated features stretching his skinny fingers over a piano. We walked past Yum Yum Donuts and then a grocery store, and then finally across the street from a billboard that hung on a fence displaying a very large portrait of Kim Kardashian. We arrived. The neon sign Cocoon glowed above a cement staircase that led to a big black basement door. A few men stood at the top of the staircase smoking, and Zoe grabbed my hand and pulled me down the steps with her. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, the bar, and the built-in benches and small tables were all painted the same shiny black, with a few recessed lights that cast a yellow sheen on everyone. Behind the bar, a woman with naturally red hair slung drinks. She twirled bottles, her thin frame and broad shoulders creating a silhouette in front of a wall of booze lit by blue lights and a plastic tube that snaked around the bottles. Small groups of men sat at tables or stood on the floor sipping drinks and talking over music so loud they had to lean in to hear each other. My nerves took over, and I couldn't look at anyone, afraid I might make eye contact with a stranger and not know what to do. We're getting shot, Zoe said. We'd had a handful of drinks over the past 5 hours, and I somehow still needed more courage. I stood barely a few steps inside the door and watched Zoe move her way through a crowd of men across the small room that made up the whole establishment. I watched Zoe order drinks and then lean over the bar, invite the bartender in for a whisper, and then gently place her hand on the back of the bartender's neck while she spoke into her ear. The bartender smiled and then slid 2 clear shots to her, followed by 2 vodka sodas. She's so fucking hot, Zoe said, handing me the shots. Volch, I said. What? Zoe said. Volch, I said louder. It's a toast. I think it means health in Armenian. We found a table and I tried to take in the room. Most of the men wore softer variations of what I'd seen men wearing all night. The typical Armenian male uniform that I'd seen was a black shirt, usually a t-shirt, and slim-fitting black pants with leather shoes, the toes of which reached out in front of them to a point. And in Cocoon, men still wore a lot of the black shirts and pants, and everyone wore pointy shoes, but those who wore black added jewelry, maybe a necklace or a silver ring. I saw a few black scarves, and one man wore a black newsboy cap. Some of the men wore the same kind of clothes, but white. A few threw in a colorful scarf or a necklace with a colorful stone, and these were all clothes they could wear anywhere on the street without drawing attention, or so I guessed. When I was 5 years old, I made my first friend, a girl named Katie, who told me she liked a boy and then chased him. She was my first friend, and her game seemed fun, and it even made my heart flutter. So I picked a boy, one in a black t-shirt with a gold necklace. I chased him around the playground, which he didn't like. He ran away from the playground to the group of teachers keeping watch. My kindergarten teacher asked me why I was chasing him. I like his necklace, I spluttered, searching for a reason, but unable to explain. She told me, boys don't chase other boys. She sat me out of recess while the boy I chased went back. Fear settled into my chest. He'd tell everyone I'd done something wrong, something classified as wrong based on the fact that we were both boys. And then after school, she told my mother, when mom came to pick me up, and she told my mom she needed to watch my behavior. This was the first time I felt I could be separated from my mother based on how I interacted with other boys. From that moment, I watched my behavior, trying desperately to catch any fairness, weakness, flounce, or misplaced smile that would invite scrutiny, and then discovery that I was different, that my body was pulled by a gravity that pulled no one else I knew. And I was constantly vigilant of the world around me. I could detect the slightest curl of the lip, the slightest glance that indicated what a person might be thinking, the smallest signs of danger, maybe a question about who I liked from a schoolmate, or a grin when I said I'd enjoyed a musical. And I would figure out how to correct the perception or imperceptibly run away as fast as I could. And if ever any boy around me showed a sign that they might be gay, I fled. Now here they were, Armenian men, looking at each other with longing, intent, flirtation, and proximity. At one table, one man's hand rested on top of another man's hand. At another table, a man with the sweetest expression in his eye looked up from where he rested his head on another man's shoulder. A group at a third table burst into laughter with high pitches and flailing hands. In the center of the small room, men danced to Nelly Furtado and Timbaland's Promiscuous, and 2 of them wrapped their arms around each other, their hips grinding softly in rhythm with the drums. I fled. I need to use the bathroom, I told Zoe, and I climbed stairs to a black door. Inside, the fluorescent light caught every bit of dirt on the white walls. I looked into the mirror. I splashed water on my face. I turned to the toilet and lifted a flimsy plastic seat to pee. Someone knocked on the door, and a scene flashed in my eyes that a man could be behind it, could push his way in after me, pursuing me up the stairs, thrusting open the door and pinning me against the wall to kiss me and touch me. Jesus, I told myself out loud. Calm down and wash your hands. When I came back into the room, Zoe was leaning over the bar again, talking to the bartender, who listened and washed glasses, half smiling. I sat down at a table, unsure of what to do. Over an amped-up bass thud, Nicki Minaj sang Starships as a few men laughed and jumped in the air. I watched them, imagining that they must know each other well. I wondered how they met each other in a world that forced them to assimilate, to put their heads down and blend into a crowd of Armenian men on the streets of Yerevan. How would a young gay man know there were other gay men in the city? How would they find each other? And how would a young gay man on his own know there was a place like this to find the smallest crowd of people throwing their arms around each other or hip thrusting to top 40 American hits? A tall man walked over to me in black boots with tall heels and a steel ring strapped to the side of each. He wore long black jeans over long legs, a black t-shirt, and a black leather vest. His thick black hair was swept away from his face and ran down the back of his neck. His black mustache curled when he looked at me and smiled. I didn't stand. "Hi," he said to me in English. "Hi," I replied. He knelt down and put one knee on the ground. "I'm Hike," he told me. His smile was kind, his eyes staring at mine, steady and half closed. He asked if I was American. I took a swig of my vodka soda. "I am." I had no idea how to have this conversation, my first in a gay bar with a gay man who I was pretty sure was coming on to me. I felt like an old door without a key, and he was trying out magic words to unlock it. "I'm Iranian," he said, "and Armenian. I come from Iran, Tehran." "That's great," I said. He reached up to my face, covered in stubble, and stroked my cheek with his hand. "You're cute," he said. "Thanks," I said. He brought his hands together to unbutton the top button of my Oxford shirt and then the button after that until a wisp of chest hair peeked out of the crevice. "This is cuter," he said. He reached just barely inside my shirt, stroked my chest, and fingered wisps of my chest hair, grazing my skin with his fingertips in circular waves. He moved his hand out of my shirt and took my left hand in both of his, massaging my palm. He asked me more questions, and to each I gave short one-word answers, unsure how to return affection, unsure if I wanted to, unsure of what I would want on the other side of this moment. I was frozen, and his heat wasn't strong enough to melt me. Suddenly, after so many one-word answers to his questions, he said, "It was nice to meet you. Have a great night," and let go of my hand. And with the abruptness of someone just drunk enough to be short without being mean, he turned and walked into a group of men on the other side of the room. Minutes later, Zoe returned. "Siren gave these to us," she said, and she handed me another vodka shot. "Who?" I asked, fatigue starting to settle in and mingling with disappointment that I'd turned to stone in the first openly gay flirtation of my life. Why hadn't I said anything back? Why hadn't I raised my hand to meet his? "Siren," Zoe repeated. "That's the bartender's name." "Okay," I muttered. I threw back my shot, and in mid-wince I squeezed out, "This is the last one." Zoe threw hers back and then sat next to me. "I saw that man coming on to you," she said. "Rawr." And she pawed at me with her hand like a claw. "Yeah," I said, "not my type." She laughed and said, "If he's not your type, who is?" I wondered if I was supposed to know. I surely didn't now, and would I ever? Then a familiar piano glissando broke my train of thought. A chorus of men and women from the 60s sang out from the speakers, a tune I remembered immediately from my father's record collection. "Dancing Queen," I shouted to Zoe, and she pulled me up onto my feet. I tingled with sudden embarrassment, feeling unable to hide as the only known Armenian man in the bar. I felt an impulse to run, but I stayed there in the center of the room, swaying and listening to ABBA sing. None of the men, in fact, were staring at me. The room was being swept up in music, and I was suddenly and completely being swept up with it. Men quickly joined us on the dance floor. Men started swaying around the perimeter, and some men climbed on top of their tables, and then shirts and scarves swirled in the air while they sang, keyboards and bass wrapping around us. I gave myself to the moment then. I danced, spinning to see the room, to see every man's flame burning, a fire of joy made from pent-up energy releasing into the air and into each other. I'd been embarrassed at my failure to flirt with a stranger. I'd been embarrassed about my otherness in a room full of people who wore otherness like a hidden badge of courage. They'd found each other, these Armenian men. They weren't embarrassed. They were waving their shirts and scarves in the air, happy to have found each other, happy to be alive. I carried that energy into the night. Zoe and I walked to a 24/7 grocery store where I bought Pringles and water, and she bought Schweppes bitter lemon and a packet of gummy bears. Outside the store, next to a building being remodeled, Zoe found a flattened cardboard box and placed it on a dusty step, sitting there and snacking. I felt a sudden welling up, a fullness. I had a queer friend I found charming, sitting now on a perch having her peculiar late-night snack. I had gone to my first gay bar, been the object of desire, felt myself in some way more desirable. I crossed over a threshold, and what I found on the other side was a garden where I could be planted and where love was water and our own eyes, our own witness of each other, warmed us like sunlight.
Yay. Um, As far as I'm aware, and I do not posit myself as the be all end all expert, as far as I'm aware, I believe this is the first novel of an American, not novel, I'm sorry, memoir of an American who had their queer awakening in Armenia. And it's just so wild to me because we have this narrative that we get right from the American perspective of, you know, this wrong sometimes perspective of what it's like to have a queer awakening in Armenia. And here you have this 2 years that you share with us and all of the feelings that just comes across that are, you know, kind of universal for queer people of that, you know, what happens, you know, who am I and who do I like and what is my type and how do I navigate this? And it's just absolutely magical also because you move throughout the entire country over that 2 year process, and we get to see moments like this, you know, and I wasn't there at Cocoon in 2009, but to be able to now I can have that moment, you know, because you've captured that space in a way that's just really fantastic, and I hope people follow, you know, in your footsteps in terms of documenting those spaces and having that archive. So it's not just an oral history, right, that we share with each other, that we can start to have this, you know, tapestry of Armenian queer life for folks to imbue and to have it. I mean, like you just said there, that's just joy. That's just joy right there of your experience. And it's so refreshing to have read that. A big part of your memoir also is dealing with family, right? So you have your family that you came out to and then left 3 days later, and then you're with all of these host families, right, as well throughout that were hosting you through your Peace Corps assignment. As you were writing it now, what came up for you that you kind of realized maybe as you were writing about your take on biological family, queer family, chosen family?
You know, as I wrote this book, I think a lot of my work in general is about belonging. And Jake and Anahit talked about belonging, particularly around, you know, trauma or reparations and how we belong to each other. You know, with family, whether or not you are blood related or you're brought together by just time and circumstance, you choose them always. You know, queer people have kind of coined the idea of chosen family, but you always choose your family, and you always choose to do the things that family do for each other. And one of the, you know, amazing things about this experience and why it was so transformative for me that even though I didn't feel safe for myself or frankly even for the families I lived with, come out as gay to them during a lot, you know, during most of the time that I was there. Those things that they extended to me, which are part of, you know, the Arnold Schwarzenegger story, actually, or some of the other things that are here in the book. Those things like taking care of me while I was sick, inviting me to look at family photo albums, of course, dancing with me at celebrations, going to weddings, like all those things that family does for each other. It created a sense of belonging and safety for me that I needed during that time. And that's, to me, you know, a lot of people are like looking for chosen family, but I kind of came away with this as with the lessons that I was given by the Armenian people that I lived with about, you know, what that looks like to provide chosen family to people who are other in some way. And that comes through, I think, and something that I have been thinking a lot about is, I don't know, now that I'm much older than I was in the book, how do I provide that for other people, and how do I be that for other people who need it?
Because you have kind of I mean, it is really kind of an epic coming out journey. Like, what advice do you have for queer folks right now that are navigating what coming out means to them? And there's a really interesting conversation right now about coming out and what it can be and what it should be. And so what advice do you have after writing this magnificent memoir and the experiences you had for queer folks who are beginning that, you know, question of when does this happen of coming out?
Yeah, I think you know, unfortunately, so it took me about 4.5 years to write the book. So if you'd asked me 4.5 years ago what advice I had, it might be a little bit different because I think the climate has changed so much around being gay. And the first thing that I think of, honestly, and a little bit sadly, is make sure that you're safe. You know, if you are obviously a young person who is dependent on people for your care, and it doesn't feel safe to come out for them, you don't have to, no. And then for me, the thing that made it possible was the chosen family that I found. Zoe is a person who obviously is in the book, who created a safe space for me, but also places like Cocoon. I did get to spend time in DIY Bar, which I think people on this or who are watching this will know. And when you find those places, caring for them is so critical. Caring for each other, caring for the places where we get to be together, whether it's homes or it's places like this, or it's bars. You don't have to come out to everyone in your life, but those places not only help you kind of come out to yourself, and in Armenia, I wasn't out everywhere. I was out in Yerevan, I was out among friends, I was out at maybe parties. And that was enough for me to be able to grapple with my own identity. I didn't have to be out everywhere. And so as we protect those spaces for ourselves, we're also protecting those spaces for each other, and settle into them and enjoy them, and take all of the joy that's possible every moment that it's possible. Because, yes, it's a struggle to be queer. It's a struggle to be any part of the rainbow. It's also so cool. It's also so great. So that's my last piece of advice. Just like take all the goodness, like let it seep into into your body, into your heart, into your memory, so that you go back to places like dancing at Cocoon when you're having a hard time and you're like, oh man, there's so much joy that's possible. If we let it be.
Your memoir is called Leap, and you have what for me is a very terrifying opening segment where you go bungee jumping, and you wrote it too well because I literally could feel it and I never want to do it, and it was very terrifying. Like even just thinking about it now, I can feel my stomach like go into my throat. But leap as a metaphor, can you talk to us about that idea of taking the leap?
Sure. So I will say about that first chapter, I think it's a unique first chapter, because it is a braided story of coming out to my parents and doing this bungee jumping. And one of the reasons I'll say, frankly, that I wrote it that way is that as I was writing the coming out chapter, which was very painful for me, writing about bungee jumping allowed me to express how I felt in the moment, and also kind of take a psychological break, which I think for readers, I think it serves a little bit of the same purpose. So I hope people enjoy that. But there are many things about bungee jumping and taking that leap that are great metaphors for coming out. There's the, kind of deciding to walk up, and the fear that it's a little bit different and a little bit the same as what you imagined. There's the standing on the edge and not wanting to go, and the amount of, internal turmoil that you have about, I'm not doing it, okay, I'm doing it. No, I'm not doing it, right? We do that before we come out. We stand on the edge. And then the thing that I had never experienced truly before until I bungee jumped was that there's this point that happens where you're not off. You can feel the ledge, right? You can feel your feet are still there, but you can't reach back and grab anything anymore. And that to me was it's giving me goosebumps, because that to me was the feeling that I had when I came out to my parents. It was like I had uttered these words out loud, and I could not, there was no going back to hold on, right? And that was the most terrifying thing. And then there's the falling, and a point at which you just say, I can't do anything. I just have to fall. I just have to fall and either enjoy it or be terrified, but either way, the falling's happening. And the final thing is that in bungee jumping, you go up and down multiple times, because that elastic rubber band, it's actually not one fall, it's over and over again. And that's the other part that I found really parallel to my queer experience, was that like in Armenia, there are many moments where I kind of come out, many moments where I have to either come out to myself, step forward into a new part of my queer identity, or truly come out to other people in a way that was scary to me. Coming out to some Armenian friends, coming out in queer spaces. So yeah, I think it was a metaphor that really worked well for me to be able to write and kind of talk about some of those experiences of coming out that are really much bigger than just sitting down at a kitchen table at night and saying some words.
Mhm. Well, congratulations on the memoir.
you.
It is a delight and such a wonderful um, journey of your queer awakening and capturing that beautiful queer Armenia life and experience that was happening at that time. If you have questions for Brent, please put them in the chat. While you're doing that, I want to remind folks that there is the IALA Off the Clock. And that is an opportunity for the community to come together. So if you're not able to stick around for the social hour, we have these IALA Off the Clock events. You can find more about them at armenianliterary.org. And let's see here. The next one is on July 21st at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, and 9 p.m. Armenia time. And details at armenianliterary.org. And I hate being the timekeeper, but I do have to be a timekeeper. So if folks don't have questions, then we might transition over to the social hour part of these events. And the social hour actually came out when we started doing this. Our first events with IALA, which I really always want to thank the International Armenian Literary Alliance for centering queer writers and queer readers from the get-go from this organization. It has been so amazing to see that happening from an Armenian organization to so very clearly and unambiguously support the queer Armenian community. And so we found that having a social hour after those first events was very meaningful to people, because afterwards I would get emails from folks that were like, I had never been in a space before where there were just so many, queer Armenian people. And there are pockets of that you can get in particular, cities. But for those of us who live in this more far-flung reaches of the diaspora, to have this time together can be very important as well. So I think what we'll do then is move over into that portion of our program. Before we do that, more applause, little heart emojis for Brent for joining us here today. Thank you, Brent, for your memoir. Congratulations on it again. In the chat, Hovsep has been putting all of the links to follow our authors here, and more importantly, where to buy their books. And we will also have all of that information on our website, armenianliterary.org, and on our social media. For folks who are watching this after today and you're watching it on YouTube, you don't see the chat. So we are going to provide that information for you as well, where you can purchase their books, which I highly recommend that you do. So I believe that we are going to stop the recording here. Thank you all very much for joining us. This has been really, truly a delight to be in community with all of you and to continue to do this through the International Armenian Literary Alliance. If you can donate, any amount is meaningful to continue this programming. If you are a writer of any, or wherever you're at, of your career, of any genre, and you are looking for support as a writer and to be in community with other Armenian writers, please consider joining International Armenian Literary Alliance as a member. We have really amazing programs like our mentorship program, which happens every summer. And we also are looking to expand that into workshop programming, and we have events like these, and we have reading events like the Literary Lights program. And so it is any donation, and if you want that support as a writer, please consider becoming a member, and you can do that at armenianliterary.org.